Welcome, welcome, welcome. And today we're going to do an easy Easter duck with watercolor and just a little bit of gouache. If you don't know me, I am Viv with Art with Viv, and today is going to be a fun and quick little painting. So let's just jump right in. I've already sketched it out on my paper. I'm using 140-pound Fabriano extra white Artistico paper. I've got a dark color. You can use black, you can mix your own black, whatever you want to use. And I'm painted in that eye, leaving just a little bit of the white of the paper shining through just to be a little bit of a highlight. Now I am going ahead and wetting the background, and then we're just going to put a nice sort of blue-green back there. I'm thinking that it might be a little too light to begin with, but we can just add more layers. It's not a big problem. So while I'm doing that, I'm going to let you enjoy the music, and I'm just going to go ahead and apply that background. Now while we let that background dry a little bit, I went ahead and mixed up sort of a pinky brown color, and I'm going to go ahead and do a light wash over the little duck's bill. He has sort of a pinky brown bill. So I'm going to go ahead and just do a quick wash. I'm lifting up some of that color where I want to have the highlights. And I am going to let that dry. And I'm just going to go ahead and do a nice yellow wash over his body. Once I get that initial light yellow wash over his body while it's still wet, I'm going to come in with a little bit of a darker yellow and just drop that in there and let that, indicate where the shadows are. So I'm just going to go where I see in my reference photo that there are shadows, and I am going to drop that darker yellow there. Now if you want an outline drawing and the exact colors I use with the color mixes I use along with the reference photo for this, then you might want to consider joining my Sweet Art Squad. It's only $5 a month, and you get 4 videos and 4 supply packets each month. So I'll link that below. Now once you start getting in there, make sure that you leave some highlights too on your little duckling. I wanted to call him a chick, but he's a duckling. I've decided that that background is probably going to be too light because I am going to make the egg blue. I want the egg to be blue as well, even though I'm not sure, but I don't think ducks lay blue eggs. I know some chickens do. I don't care. This is my painting, and the egg is going to be blue. You can make your egg whatever color you want to. So I just went ahead and wet that egg and put in that light sort of bluish green color. Now the beak is dry, that first initial wash is dry, so I'm coming in with a little bit of a darker pinky brown color. I'm just going around the edge and just going to paint in where the shadows are on his beak. I'm looking at the reference photo so I'll know where the shadows are. So now we're just doing a wet onto dry application because I want the edges to be a little harder, a little bit more pronounced. I don't want them to be so soft and fuzzy. So I'm just going to paint in those shadow areas. Now once I get those darker areas of the beak, I'm going to come back in with a little darker yellow, maybe with a little yellow ochre in there, just to darken it up. And I'm going to make these shadows just a little bit darker around his head. Now I have wet it first, and then I'm just dropping in that darker color into that wet area, and then bringing it along the line of his head and down his little cheek. Now on his body, I'm going to do pretty much the same thing with the darker color where the shadows are. And I'm trying to make tiny little brush strokes so that they look feathery, like little fluffy feathers. Baby chickens and baby ducks are just big balls of fluff. So I just want it to look really fluffy, really fringy. So I'm just doing really tiny brush strokes to look like the feathers. And I'm making sure that they are going in the direction that his feathers or her feathers are growing out of his body, because that will make it look a little bit more realistic. Now I am mixing up sort of a grayed down yellow, and that's going to be for some of the shadows. Notice I'm picking up a little bit of that blue-green color and mixing it with the yellow to make it look more gray. And that's just to get some of these grayer, cooler looking shadows. You know, when I say cool, I mean temperature, not, cool, but cool as in the temperature, not warm. I hope that makes sense. And just going ahead and putting that sort of greenish, yellowish mixture in there for those cooler shadows. I'm also making little feathery strokes, those little tiny strokes. The paper is dry, that yellow is dry underneath, and I'm letting that brighter yellow, that paler yellow shine through. I'm making sure that I'm making my strokes far enough apart where some of that pale yellow will shine through and it'll look nice and fuzzy. Now that my egg is dry, I most definitely need to make the background darker. So I've just mixed up a nice dark blue-green, added just a little bit of Payne's Gray to it to sort of gray it and darken it down. Again, I'm not trying to do a nice solid wash. I want the color to have some variation so it looks like it has some movements. So I'm not trying to do an even wash. I'm just slapping the paint. I'm just going to be honest. I'm just slapping the paint on there, just slapping it every which way. I don't care because I don't want an even wash. Now once I got that in there, I'm just going to let it dry, and I'm going to work on this beak. I'm going to darken up some of the shadows. I'm going to do another layer. The beak is dry, so this is a wet on dry technique, and I'm just getting those really dark shadows on his little pinky brown beak and sort of blending those out making sure that I'm looking at the reference photo so I'll have the shadows in the correct place and the correct shape. That's the biggest thing, is to make them the right shape and the right lightness or darkness. I've also got some white gouache out on my palette, and I'm going ahead and painting in the highlights on top of his beak with that white gouache. Now the background has dried somewhat, so I'm taking my gouache and I've mixed it with my yellow watercolor so that it'll be opaque. The gouache will make it be opaque, and I'm just doing little feathers that are sort of going out into the background around the edges of his head, and I'm also putting some lighter areas on his head with the lighter gouache yellow, the yellow mixed with the gouache, and that just gives him a fuzzy look. It makes his little head look really fuzzy, and that's what we're after. If I paint this background one more time, we're going to have to do this again because I'm thinking I might paint some purple over that background, but we'll see. So I'm just adding some lighter yellow gouache where the highlights on his feathers are, and in some of the areas where they're lighter. And it's opaque. Gouache makes the watercolor opaque when you mix it with the gouache, the white gouache. It lightens it, makes it more opaque. So that is why I have mixed it with my watercolor, because I want it to stand out against that dark background back there and also stand out against the darker shadows. So I'm going to continue with my gouache mixture, making him fuzzy. And in some of the areas on his body, I also added that lighter gouache around his little eye. I'm thinking I want to make my egg look a little bit more three-dimensional, so it's going to need a shadow. So I'm going to go ahead with that same mixture that I used for the first wash on the egg. I'm going ahead and putting another layer, which will darken it up. Excuse me, didn't mean to hit the mic. Which will darken it up. And then I'm just going to take some clean water and sort of blend that out, so that it's a smoother blend. It doesn't have to be perfectly smooth, but it's a smoother blend. Getting that shadow where the little duckling is leaving sort of a shadow, and just taking my larger brush with clean water, sometimes with a little bit of paint on it, and just sort of blending that around so that there's some smoother edges. It's not quite as hard edged. So probably am definitely going to darken up the background again, because every time I bring that egg a little bit darker, it gets too close to the background color and it almost blends into the background. So we will be darkening that up. I'm just taking a little bit more of my darker yellow mixture and darkening up some of these shadows around his face, around his beak. And then I'm going to take some burnt sienna or raw sienna, doesn't matter. Maybe a little yellow ochre mixed in. And I'm going to do this straw that he's sitting in. And I'm just going to do a wash on it first, just sort of a pale wash. And get those little straws that are sticking up, those little sticks and straws and things, and just paint that in one wash to begin with, and then we'll go from there. Now his head is dry, so I'm just taking a damp brush and just sort of patting along his head to sort of blend in that texture so it's not so strong. And as promised, I am going to put a little bit of purple over this green to darken it up, since I've darkened up the egg and now the egg is looking too much like the background. So I'm just taking a mixture of the purple and the dark green, and I'm just doing another layer on that background. Again, I'm just slapping the paint on there. I'm not being really particular about it. I don't care if it's an even wash. I kind of like the way that, it's darker in some areas and lighter in other areas. It gives it a little bit of movement and dimension and just some interest back there, so it's not just a flat background. So we're just going to go ahead and put that purple mixture over there. I'm painting over his fuzzies, so of course we're going to have to go back in with the gouache and redo those fuzzies once that background dries. It's not a big deal. And once we get that background painted in, we're going to let it dry a little bit, and I'm going to come with some darker browns and just do some random marks, some random shadows in this first wash. It's dry now, so I'm just sort of giving the indication of some straw by just adding in all kinds of lines, going in different directions, little shapes and shadows. I don't really have a rhyme or a reason to it. I'm not trying to follow the reference photo exactly. I don't want to get into all that. I'm not going to use masking fluid. Some people put the first layer down and then they put some masking fluid and then they put another layer and more masking fluid. That's just too complicated. I'm not that interested in having a realistic, completely photorealistic little nest. So I'm just going to go ahead and just add some darker browns in there and some different lines and shapes to indicate that he's sitting or she's sitting on a little bed of straw. while I'm waiting on that straw to dry, that brown that we just painted, I'm going to go ahead and add a few more details to his beak, her beak, its beak, the duck's beak. We are just going to darken that up, and then we're going to go, the background is dry enough, the purple background. So I'm going to go ahead, bring in some more of my gouache, mix it with my yellow just like we did before, and go ahead and put those fuzzies back in now that I've got my background dry. I'm not going to make that background any darker, so this is the last time we're going to fuzzy him up, and I'll just let you watch and enjoy the music. I'm just adding a little bit of the pure white gouache to the egg where the highlight would be, and then just taking some clean water and blending that out. Then I'm going to take that same gouache, the white gouache, and I'm going to mix it with my brownish, that yellow brown paint, and I am going to have a lighter color, sort of brown, and I'm just going to go in there and just sort of paint all kinds of different sticks and straw and have it going every which direction, and just keep layering that with, we're going light and dark and just different colors of brown to give it a little bit more of a realistic look. Now I'm going in with some darker brown because I decided that that was a little too light for me. So we are going to go ahead with that darker brown, still mixed with a little bit of gouache so that it's more opaque. And then we are going to start, while it's still wet, while that gouache layer, gouache and watercolor mixed layer is still wet, I'm going to come in there with darker browns and see how smooth that goes in there while it's still wet, and it looks a little bit more like straw. And now I'm just going to start layering different shades of brown, lighter browns with the medium browns and the really pale browns, and all of it has just a tiny bit of that white gouache mixed in with it to make it opaque. And I'm going to let you watch it and enjoy the music, and I shall return shortly. And right at the end, I'm going to get some really of a darker browns in there now that I've got so many lighter tones, and just put some darker browns in there for like the deep shadows, and that really brings those lighter colors forward. We're almost done. I'm really liking our little Easter chick. I think he is adorable, or she, I don't know. But thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. Please share it with a friend. Give me a thumbs up, subscribe, and I shall see you soon. Happy painting, guys.